Hi folks, Adam Andrews from CenterForLit with you once again with a few words about teaching literature classically. And today I want to talk about something called poetic awareness. It's a kind of literary appreciation that I think is really critical to our job as lit teachers. Today I want to talk about what the phrase means, what the concept is, why it's important, and how you go about teaching it or inculcating it into your students. The term poetic awareness comes from the Greek word poema, which means something made. It's where we get the English words poetry and poem, of course. And it means a made thing, a thing constructed by the mind and hands of man, so to speak. Poetic awareness, then, is the understanding of the shape and structure and style and genre of a work of literature. We talked in an earlier video about something called phonetic awareness of literature, and this had to do with the understanding of the pronunciation and definition of words. You might say that phonetic awareness answers the question, what do these words mean and how do they sound? When we turn to poetic awareness, we ask a different set of questions, or I should say poetic awareness answers a different set of questions. Not what do these words mean, but what shape do they take when you put them all together? And what is the significance of that shape? So poetic awareness has to do with the structure of a piece of writing, the style of a piece of writing, and the genre of a piece of writing. Now, it should be obvious why understanding and being aware of the structure, style, and genre of a piece of writing is important. But I want to talk about that for just a minute, just in case the importance of it is a little bit opaque. First of all, we could ask this question. What is the difference between a novel and a newspaper? What's the difference between a novel and a newspaper? Well, you might say the words used in a novel are different than the words used in a newspaper. But that answer really wouldn't get you very far. You can imagine, for example, a novel about a man reading a newspaper. And perhaps the newspaper article is being read aloud in the novel. In that case, the words of the novel and the words of the newspaper would be identical. The difference isn't, in other words, in the vocabulary of the novel and the newspaper, except by accident. The difference lies somewhere else. It lies in the structure, the form, the purpose, the style, the genre of the piece of writing. If you pick up a novel, you know that you are not reading a restaurant menu. You know that you are not reading an op-ed. You know that you are not reading a last will and testament. And I would argue that the reason you know that is that those kinds of writing have different purposes, different forms, different structures, different styles, and belong to different genres. An awareness of all of these things amounts to an awareness of the made-ness of the thing, the structure of a thing, the poetics, if I could put it that way, of a thing. And that's why we call this poetic awareness. Now, why is it important? Why is it important to have this kind of awareness of a work of literature? Well, it turns out that the significance and meaning and weight and heft of a work of literature has a lot to do with its structure. Let me give you an example. There's a great poem by the 17th century poet John Donne, one of his holy sonnets that you may be familiar with. I want to read it to you and talk about its structure for just a minute and see if a poetic awareness of this poem, by the definition that I've just given, helps us understand it. It goes like this. Batter my heart, three-personed God, for you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend, that I may rise and stand, o'erthrow me, and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. I, like an usurped town, to another do labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. Reason, your viceroy in me should defend, but is captive and proves weak or untrue. Yet dearly I love you, and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me. John Donne's holy sonnet, Batter My Heart. Beautiful, yes? If we were talking about the phonetic awareness that we mentioned in an earlier video, the understanding of the words the poet uses in this poem, we would have a couple of moments where we had a good teaching opportunity with our students and they were brought to closer to an understanding of the poem. I'm thinking, of course, of the word viceroy. Reason your viceroy in me should defend. We might ask, well, what is viceroy, Johnny? What does that mean? We talk about the fact that it means representative, and then that sentence makes a little bit more sense. Reason, your representative God in me ought to defend me and tell me the truth and convince me of the rightness of your existence and your love, but is captive, he says, and proves weak or untrue. The word viceroy, phonetic awareness of that sentence, helps us understand the passage. We might also go down to the end and look at the word ravish in the very last line, nor ever chaste except you ravish me. What does it mean to ravish someone? Well, uncomfortably, it means to take them by force in a sexual way. It's a rough synonym for rape. Now, a reader who is looking to understand John Donne's Holy Sonnet probably needs to have a phonetic awareness of that last line, and in particular of the significance of the word ravish. But I would submit to you that unless and until we also gain some sort of poetic awareness of the poem, some sort of knowledge of its structure, of its style, and of its genre, then a full understanding of the poem, and thus a full appreciation, is still going to be beyond our reach. Because it turns out that this poem proceeds by means of three separate images. It proceeds by means of a literary device called imagery, and the poet constructs very carefully and delivers to us three images. The first one is the image of a tinker or a mechanic polishing up a broken toy. Batter my heart, the poet says. Knock on me with your hammer, as it were. Use your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. As yet you but knock, breathe, shine, as it were, rub with a rag and seek to mend. The image is there of a toy being fixed by a tinker, and then later on of a blacksmith reforging a piece of metal. O'erthrow me and bend your force like a blacksmith would a horseshoe, to break, blow, burn, and make me new. If these individual words are taken together as building an image in the reader's mind, we can see a tinker shining up a toy, a blacksmith reforging a piece of metal. And we get the idea that the poet, the supplicant in this first stanza, is asking God to fix him, to reforge him, to use force upon him to remake him in some other image. The poet then proceeds to give us a further image when he says, I, like a usurped town, to another do labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. And this is the part where he says, reason your viceroy in me should defend, but is captive, and proves weak or untrue. The second big image we get is the image of a captured town in war. It's been taken by the enemy and is no longer master of its own fate, no longer has the power to make its own decisions. If we combine that image of a usurped town, a captured town, with the first image of a bent horseshoe or a broken toy, we get the idea that the poet is begging God to overthrow him, begging God to cancel his will out, to present him with a strength stronger than his own. He says, I dearly love you and would be loved fain. Phonetic understanding of that word fain would be helpful here. Would be loved as well, would be loved in return, but am betrothed unto your enemy. And here we get the third great image of this fabulous poem, the image of betrothal and marriage and the relationship between a bride and a bridegroom. In the ancient times, betrothal was as binding a contract as marriage. And so the poet says, divorce me. He asks God in the image of the betrothal, of the relationship between a bridegroom and a bride who is betrothed unto the enemy. He asks God to divorce me, untie or break that knot again. Break this unholy marriage by your great power. And then he makes the point even stronger. He says, take me to you And there's a sexual overtone to this sentence, right? Imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, except you overwhelm my senses and my will by your sensual power, I never shall be free. Unless you imprison me and enthrall my senses, I'll never be free, nor ever chaste, ever pure, ever virginal, except you ravish me. Using a technique very popular in the 17th century called the metaphysical conceit, whereby poets said something outlandish and compared something good and holy to something horrible in order to shock their readers into paying close attention. The poet presents us with one last image, one last piece of imagery, whereby he compares his soul to a captured wife, to a captured fiancé. And he asks God to break the marriage between his soul and the enemy. The stylistic techniques that the poet employs in this poem, I would submit, are something beyond simple phonetic awareness of the words. We can understand all of those words and come to some sort of understanding of what the poet might be saying. But once we understand the idea of imagery, of how a poet is creating a word picture and comparing his soul to one thing in the first stanza, his soul to another in the second stanza, and his soul to something else in the third stanza, then the theme of the poem begins to emerge. I'll say one more thing about the structure of this poem. Not only does it use imagery, but it is also a sonnet. And the fact that it's a sonnet means a couple of things. First of all, it means that it has a particular form and a particular shape and a particular structure. In this case, 3 quatrains, 3 groups of 4 lines, and a couplet at the end. And not only that, but the sonnet also has quatrains that proceed in a particular rhyme scheme, ABBA, CDDC, EFFE, GG, or something like that. All sonnets adhere to a particular rhyme scheme. And most importantly of all, the sonnet presents a problem in the first 2 or 3 quatrains, and then presents some sort of solution to the problem or some new way of thinking about the problem in the final couplet. This is how do I put it? This is a rule by which all composers of sonnets live and breathe and work. In order for the poem to be a sonnet, it has to have this characteristic. And that's a really important detail for us as readers, because we can turn that detail around on its head and say, if we notice that something is a sonnet, if it has 14 lines, 3 quatrains and a couplet, a particular rhyme scheme, we can also know this about it, that it presents a problem in the first 3 quatrains and provides a solution or a depth of understanding in the final couplet. And that gives us a clue as to what the underlying meaning of the poem might be. Let's take a look. In the first 3 quatrains of this poem, the poet has compared his soul to various kinds of broken things or imprisoned things or overthrown things. And he begs God to break him, to shine him up, to imprison him, and finally to divorce him. And then he says, except you enthrall me, in the final couplet, I never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me. He explains in these final 2 couplets what the point of all these images was, which is that the overwhelming force of God is necessary, and that salvation comes by the breaking down of all of the human things that the wayward soul has set up. Poetic understanding of a work of literature is a sensitivity to the structure, sonnet form, the style, literary imagery, and the genre, religious poetry of the work of literature. I would submit that it's much different than phonetic awareness. Perhaps I'd say this, that it goes beyond phonetic awareness. But I would also say that it depends on phonetic awareness, right? In order to have a poetic awareness of a work of literature, you got to be able to understand what the words mean first. But the next step is you see the words working in their shapes and in their structures. You ask yourself the question, what is the shape of the thing before me? Now, lest you think that my use of the word poetic to describe this kind of awareness confines its use to poetry only, let me say that poetic just means structure, and that poetic awareness of any work of literature is available and even necessary to full appreciation. A novel has a structure too, just like a sonnet. And poetic awareness of a novel amounts to understanding the structure, the exposition, rising action, climax, denouement, and conclusion that all novels share. The issues of characterization and the nature and goals of the protagonist, which all novels share. In the very same way that seeing the quatrains and the couplet work together in a sonnet produces a kind of awareness, what we'll call poetic awareness of the sonnet, seeing the rising action and climax and denouement of a novel work together with the protagonist's goals and the underlying conflict produces the same kind of awareness of a novel. I'm going to say something more. Poetic awareness of this type is critical for final appreciation of literature. You can't have the kind of appreciation that we're all looking for unless you understand at some level the shape of the thing before you. Where in phonetic awareness, we ask the question and answer the question, what do these words mean? In poetic awareness, we ask and answer the question, what is the shape of the thing before me? And what is the significance, thematic and otherwise, of that shape? Okay, last thing. How do we teach poetic awareness? A term is only useful if it suggests its own pedagogy, as I've said in another place. And this is a really easy question to answer because if poetic awareness means being able to recognize the shape and structure of a work of literature, then the pedagogy that's obvious, that's suggested by the very term itself, is asking students about the shape and structure and form and genre of the work before them. Questions in the context of discussion like, who is the protagonist of this story? What is the protagonist's desire? What obstacles stand in his way of achieving that desire? What kind of conflict does this represent? Man versus man, man versus nature? What's the thematic significance of that conflict? Questions about the structure, about the style. What images, what symbols does the author use to underscore his themes? Questions about the genre. Is this a travel log? Is this a novel of manners? Is this a sonnet? Those are the kinds of questions that produce poetic awareness. And so the term suggests its own pedagogy. I want to suggest to you that this is a very important kind of literary appreciation, poetic awareness, that it proceeds from phonetic awareness and is maybe impossible without it. However, I want to say one last thing. Obviously, poetic awareness is not sufficient to full appreciation of literature. We all know this, right? You can pass a test on Hamlet and still not love Hamlet. You can identify the protagonist and the climactic moment of the play and be completely unmoved by Hamlet. In other words, you can have all the poetic awareness that you want and still not have a true literary experience. And this, of course, is because there's a third kind of awareness that is the ultimate goal of all reading and lit teaching, that is beyond even poetic awareness. And I want to talk about that in the next video. But before I get there, I want to say that this third kind of awareness relies upon phonetic and poetic awareness in order to emerge. And so as lit teachers, we need to pay careful attention, not just to teaching our students the definitions of all the words they encounter, but also making them aware of the structures into which those words are built by great authors. Poetic awareness. There you go. I hope this has been informative, inspiring, and helpful. If you would like to find out what we have to say about that third kind of awareness, which I'll tell you is called pneumatic awareness, check the videos below, and we'd love to hear your comments as well. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time.